Welcome to everybody, and thank you all for showing an interest in the King's Award. First of all, I'd like to say that the window for applications opened on the 1st of September and closes on the 1st of December. So we're smack in the middle of that window. So there's opportunity for applications to be made this year, which would be for presentation on the King's birthday announcement in 2025. So it's a good time to be doing this. And I've also got to say, as the slide shows, the King's Award for Voluntary Service is a fantastic way of saying thank you to your volunteers and also to the people that support your organisation. But as I hope you'll see as we go through today, it's an awful lot more than that. Next slide, please. Okay. I'd like to start just by explaining what the King's Award for Voluntary Service is. And as you can see here, it's the highest award given by the state to groups across the UK. And it's entirely and completely for voluntary service. So it doesn't include enterprises which are commercial. It's also nationally regarded as an equivalent to an MBE, but for groups rather than for individuals. Next slide, please. To be nominated, I won't read through this lot. You can see what it says, but eligibility is without doubt the thing I get most questions about. So I thought it would be worth leaving those bullet points out whilst I just say a few words so that you've got time to absorb that information. And if you want to ask questions at this stage before we go from this slide, please feel free to do so. But as I can't see any of you, I'm going to have to rely on someone telling me if people have got questions. The most common questions I get are, to what extent does led by volunteers, not paid staff, actually apply? And the second most common then is, what ratio of volunteers to paid staff is seen as appropriate? And the answers, as you might expect, are not as straightforward as you would hope. There's no magic formula that says it has to be this proportion, and there's no magic formula to say what being led by volunteers is, apart from the fact that the strategic decisions of the organisation should be made by volunteers. So if you employ a CEO, and that CEO makes the strategic decisions about delivery, then probably the organisation may not be appropriate. And I say may not because there are some exceptions. And so it's always worth checking before you dismiss the idea. And then the second element of the question about ratios, and there isn't a correct answer. The simple fact of the matter is that, of course, many organisations are volunteer-led in that they've got trustees that are all volunteers, and they make the decisions and set the policy. And then a few staff may be employed to roster individuals, for example, and that's perfectly acceptable. As long as the main delivery of benefit to the beneficiaries is being delivered by volunteers. And it doesn't have to be completely volunteers, but as long as the predominance of delivery is by volunteers, then that would probably go forward as being acceptable. And that sounds awfully complex, and I apologize for that, but it's why I've said it's where the majority of questions come from. It's not straightforward, but fundamentally, this is an award for volunteers. So the eligibility criteria is written in such a way that it tries to make it clear that the volunteers are at the heart of the organisation, both in decision-making and in delivery of service. Are there any questions before I move on to the next slide? If not, then next slide, please. Thank you.
And there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Sorry, okay.
There's a couple of questions in the chat about that. Someone has said, does a board of trustees count as being led by volunteers?
Well, it depends on the board of trustees. If the board of trustees are being paid, then they would probably disqualify the organisation if they're making the decisions. But if the board of trustees are volunteers with perhaps one paid member, then again, that would be fine. It's really just a question of the predominance of decision making and the predominance of delivery is in the hands of the volunteers themselves. And trustees, if they're volunteers, are part of that volunteer structure.
And just to ask another question, we've got a question here from Julie in the chat. Can it be youth-led? Would that still qualify if it was a youth-led organisation?
Can it be youth-led? Yes. But I would say if there is an organisation that is youth-led, that stands great benefit. Great, and yes, I would say that's a definite positive. Any more?
We've got a hand up from Lee from Citizens Advice.
Hi there. I was just going to ask whether or not, you know, what you would need to demonstrate. So what would we need to show to evidence that we are making those decisions by volunteers?
Yeah, Lee, I gather you're from Citizens Advice.
I am, yeah.
I can tell you that last year, one of the successful organisations that received the award in Norfolk was a Citizens Advice office. So there is precedent, and it comes down to the bulk of delivery being in the hands of volunteers. And although you're a national organisation, the thing that will make you stand out from what is the norm, in other words, what's happened in the last few years that's pushed you over and above. And I can think immediately of lots of examples. Just the increase in indebtedness and the requests for financial advice, the requests for help with food and support, all of those things are things that have occurred in the last few years that would increase the chances. So I would say definitely it's not going to be a difficulty proving that you're a volunteer-led organisation.
Thanks, Stuart. That's great. Thank you.
We've got one more question in the chat, which is, if an organisation has already been awarded a Queen's Award, are they eligible to apply still for the King's Award?
The Queen's Award and the King's Award are one and the same thing, and therefore, they are for life. So the King's Award is a lifetime award for the life of the organisation. So unless something were to occur and the organisation disgraced itself and the monarch decided to withdraw the award, which I'm not aware of ever happening. So, but those are the only circumstances when you'd lose it. So there's no need, if you've got a Queen's Award for voluntary service, there's no need to apply for a King's Award. It's the same thing. Any more?
Maya from Shelter is asking a question. She's putting her hand up.
Hi, sorry, I thought it'd be easier just to put my hand up. I don't know if I'm getting this correct. So is it the whole organisation receives the award, or can it be, say, like a voluntary group who is a voluntary group in their own right, but they are a group in association with that organisation or as a part of that organisation, if that makes sense?
Maya, it can be both.
Okay.
I would say that because Shelter is a national-based organisation, it's much easier to focus on local delivery. And therefore, if you've got local groups of volunteers that are doing something that's outstanding, then that Shelter office could apply in its own right, or that Shelter group could apply in its own right, or subgroup. But both are possible. But honestly, if you started to deal with if you like, a national application for the organisation Shelter, it would get far too complicated because there are so many different areas and offices. So it's much better to stay local and focus on one part of the organisation that's delivering the service, and that is predominantly voluntary.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, should we move on?
think we've just got one more question. If you
Sorry?
do both parties need to be in Norfolk, both volunteers and recipients? That's from Janet from Dementia Adventure.
Gosh, I think there are lots of examples where the King's Award has been, or the Queen's Award has been given, where boundaries are crossed. But it's where you're based that will determine where the application should go. So in our case, if you're based in Norfolk, but some of your support is in Suffolk or Lincolnshire or Cambridgeshire, that's not an issue. That the organisation would still be perfectly entitled to apply for the award through the Norfolk process, if you see what I mean. It's a national process anyway, and so I'm trying to think at the moment. For those of you that know, there's an organisation called the Matthew Project, and the Matthew Project stretches across county boundaries, but stays within the region, and that would be perfectly acceptable to make an application, but to demonstrate as much as possible the difference it makes within our community locally, if you see what I mean. I see there's another one there. Does a board of, sorry, I can't read the whole thing. There's another question in chat, I think, is there?
I think we're up to date with the questions in the chat.
In that case, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So first of all, what does the group benefit from the award? And the official answer is shown here. And it doesn't look a great deal. A certificate signed by the King, which most organisations cherish, and a domed crystal glass with the K of Yes logo emblazoned within it. And that's what's formally presented to the group. In addition, the group would get 2 invitations to a royal garden party. And they're not guaranteed because circumstances mean garden parties get cancelled occasionally and that sort of thing. But normally, 2 individuals from the group would then be invited to participate. But that's the formal answer to the question, what do they get? And in that, of course, the wording of the certificate is such that it demonstrates the recognition of the monarch and the thanks of the monarch for the work of the volunteers. But it's much more important that you know what the effect is. And the effect is massive. I have to say, I've been doing this now for about 3 years, and every organisation that's received the Queen's Award previously, but now the King's Award, it's made a massive difference to the morale of their volunteers. That in its turn has improved recruitment because those people looking to volunteer have confidence that what they're volunteering for is a proper structured organisation. And similarly, it improves the credibility because it makes a statement about the services being delivered by that organisation. And that benefits both the beneficiaries and other charities because it gives them confidence that they can refer people. And all of those, I think, are really important. So for me, the most valuable part about this is the impact upon morale. Next slide, please. I've put up here, how can you help? This is really, how can we help? All of us, I think, most of you that have come in today are either volunteers or work with voluntary organisations or alongside them. And for that reason, I would say, please look beyond just your own organisation, look beyond those organisations that you rely on, that you know are manned by volunteers. And if you think they're deserving of an award, then consider nominating them. Equally, if you are a councillor or you're in public service, but have regular contact with the voluntary organisation, then please consider making the nomination yourself. If you're within the organisation and you think the organisation you represent is deserving of a King's Award, technically, I have to tell you, you can't apply for the award yourself. It has to be someone from outside the organisation. but that doesn't mean to say that you can't look around. The most common fertile ground are trustees that have had to stand down, but know intimately the work of the organisation. So former trustees are a good source. And also the more valuable source are beneficiaries. And a lot of beneficiaries would probably think they'd run a mile rather than have to produce a citation or application. And everyone starts to think about honours and awards and needing to wordsmith things. It's really not that difficult. The online registration process and application process is amazing. It's very simple. As I've said, the nomination window runs from the 1st of September and till the 1st of December. That gives us, even now, 6 weeks to get an application in process. I'm available to help. Other deputy lieutenants would be available to help if I can't make it. And it's just a question of getting the application registered. In other words, getting the nominator registered and then getting an application filled out. It's not overly complex. I even started a process 48 hours before the deadline last year, and we managed to get it in. The most difficult thing is finding 2 supporting letters. And getting 2 supporting letters is not difficult, provided you've got plenty of people, but you've got to look for the right sort of letter. And the instinct is to say, well, perhaps we could get a Lord Mayor or someone from high civic office. And yeah, one of those is fine. But generally speaking, the selection board look for genuine impact that the organisation has had. And there's no better person to demonstrate that than a beneficiary. I visited a small charity a few weeks ago, and they showed me a letter from a parent. Their daughter had had a life-threatening disease, had to have treatment in London, and they didn't have the money to get to London and be with their child going through the treatment. The thank you letter that those parents wrote was far more moving and has much more impact than somebody like the Lord Mayor saying this is a jolly good charity. And that's what I mean. If you can get beneficiaries involved with those supporting letters, it has much more effect. What else do I need to say? If you make an application outside of the nomination window, first of all, the online system is closed. But if you want to nominate an organisation, just come to us. The email's there, kingsawards.norfolk@gmail.com. And later on, my personal email's on the last slide. So please just contact us. We'll get it registered and we'll be able to advise you how to move forward and promote. And the final thing is to talk about it with other organisations, to make other people aware that the King's Award for Voluntary Service is there, that we've got a good record in Norfolk, but it's not outstanding. And yet, having been a DL now for 5 years, I've spent my time going round the county, attending events where I've been amazed by the effort of our volunteers. And often that's unrecognised and goes without thanks. So please, you can all do your bit to help promote this system, because it's a fantastic way of not just saying thank you, but recognising the hard work of all those volunteers. Next slide, please. Oh, hang on. I've got somebody asking a question there. So you cannot put your own organisation forward. No, you can't. But having said that, it's a bit like a state award. People don't apply for a state award themselves, a BEM or an MBE. Other people do it. And in theory, it's supposed to be done in isolation. In other words, the individual, or in our case, the group, should not know that they've been put forward. In practice, that's often impossible to achieve. So having a few people in the organisation being aware that an application is being considered is not a disaster, and it certainly won't preclude an application being made. And indeed, the senior people in the organization, and I don't mean that in terms of rank, I mean that in terms of length of service and so forth, are going to know which people are likely to be in a position to support the application process, either through making the application or by producing a letter of support. There was another question flashed up there, but I didn't see what it was.
That was from our colleague Nikki, who says, is it a competitive process with a limit on the number of awards for each area?
Okay. It's not, there's no limit. The number of applications per year is around about, well, it fluctuates. It's between sort of 1,500 and 2,500, dependent upon what sort of year it's been. And I don't mean anything by that, apart from the fact that some years are good years for people making applications, other years are not. There is no allocation. So, for example, in Norfolk, I think the highest number we've ever had make application is probably 13 organisations. I'm determined to try and improve on that, because from those 13 applications, 4 were successful. And they weren't, the ones that failed didn't fail because of anything other than process. In other words, the organisation that made the application didn't seek help and may not have met the criteria fully, but was putting it in to see whether or not it would be accepted. And sadly, that does happen a lot, which is why I say, please contact us, and you can contact me on my mobile telephone or by the website. It's much better to get help with that application. And if you're inside the organization, then we can often help try and find people outside the organization that could support your application. Given what we do, we tend to have a very big network of people around the county. And if I don't know somebody myself, I'll go to a deputy lieutenant that's in the area where the organization operates, and they almost certainly will. So we can provide help, and but there's no quota, which is, I think, fundamentally what's there, the question. Is it competitive? Yes, intensely. On average, it's hundreds of applications are approved. I think last year there was just over 390. And that was from a number of applications that was about 1,500. So yes, it's competitive, but a lot of those that fail because they haven't met a criteria.
We've had a little flurry of questions come in, actually.
Okay, it's okay. Keep going.
Suzanne asks, can a group which is connected to a church be nominated?
A group that's connected to a church can. I would add that I wouldn't try and I think things that have got a singularly religious focus are unlikely to be successful. Things that are providing direct support to the community are likely to be successful, whether they're religious structure or not. In other words, if there's a tangible benefit to the community you operate in, then the application will be considered along with all the others. If that tangible benefit is only spiritual, then almost certainly it would be rejected. There's no reason for that other than you might anticipate, given the multicultural nature of our society, if you start to favor one religion over another, it becomes very, very difficult. And so things that are intended to improve our spiritual basis tend to not be included in this award scheme. There are other things that aren't. I know, for example, that big music events that require a lot of work and often are volunteer-led often fail. And they fail largely because they're seen as commercial enterprises. In other words, they set out to, yes, provide a music venue, but then there's charging for tickets and so forth. There are exceptions to that, but generally they fail as well for that reason. Another question?
You. Another question was, can you nominate more than one organisation?
You can nominate as many as you like. Yes, please, is my answer.
That's good. That's a quick one.
Yeah.
Who sets up the nominator account? Would that be somebody from the organisation or the nominator?
No, it needs to be the nominator themselves, because they have to give their personal contact details. And it's simply name, a telephone contact, and an email address. And fundamentally, that's all you do to register as a nominator. And then you get access to the application process, and the application process online is very straightforward. It's all done by boxes. And because it's by boxes, there's not a restricted word limit, but it's better if you stay within the box, because otherwise you end up having to wordsmith things and reduce it down. But it's very simple and it's very straightforward, and the questions are very straightforward. And the language to be used is not fancy. Applications that say it like it is are far more effective than applications that have flowery language. So please don't worry about citations being beautifully wordsmithed or crafted. That's not necessary. The important thing is get the message across of how the organisation benefits the local community or the element of community it's supporting.
If I can ask another one quickly, Laura from Age UK asks, can a volunteer who is also a beneficiary provide a supporting letter?
No, because they're a volunteer, they're within the organisation. But being a beneficiary means you probably know other beneficiaries, and I would suggest going to another one. There's no reason why you can't help them write a letter of support and get them to sign it. So don't be afraid of, no one's going to audit anything at the end of the day to see who drafted the letter before it was signed. The important thing is it's signed, and it's signed by a person who ideally would be a beneficiary but is outside of the organisation.
The letters of support, a question around that, just a clarifying question. Can they be, do they have to be physical letters, or would they be able to email or complete them on an online form?
They're normally scanned and uploaded to support. For the letters of application, there's a 500-word limit. And that's not including all the addresses, that's just the content of the letter. And that's done only because they have to be uploaded. And if you've got a 5-page letter, it becomes very difficult to manage the volume that have to be managed. So yeah, there's a 500-word limit on letters of support. Other than that, that's, I don't know what. Any more questions?
There's just one more from Samantha asking, does it matter if the group is aimed at a particular age?
No, it does not matter. And indeed, frankly, at the moment, the more applications we can get that are aimed at youth, that are aimed at ethnic groups, that are aimed at specific elements of the older generation, dementia groups and so forth. All of these have got great sympathy within the administration. I've just been briefed about the Prime Minister's priorities, and he wants to see as diverse a spread as possible with our national honours system. So one would hope that all groups will be included equally. Any more?
I was just going to ask if there is an age limit on the supporting letters? So if a beneficiary is a young person, would they be able to write a letter?
Absolutely, as long as they're old enough to sign it properly and they can mean it. I think if it was a very young person, there may need to be some sort of parental addition to demonstrate that what was said was heartfelt from the child, but represented the views of the family as well. Something of that sort, you know, and I'm talking about if they were 4 or 5, but if you're just talking about a young person, yes, applications from young people are just as valid and would be very welcomed. Any more questions? Okay. As you can see, the steps to nomination, I think we've been through there. And so I'll move on to the next slide, please. Okay, this please don't be put off, because often when I hear things like this, and I've attended several webinars myself, the application process sounds as if it's complex. In this case, I promise you it's not. It's very straightforward. The important thing, as it says in that second bullet, is just tell the story. Make sure that the story that's on the application form reflects what the organization does, the difference it makes to people's lives. And that's what persuades the selection board. And it has far more impact. And as I said before, don't worry about writing a citation. If you need help, we can always help you wordsmith. But honestly, it's not complicated. You just need to make sure that story is told. And next slide, please. And I think that brings me to the my final slide, and it's for me to say there are literally hundreds of volunteer organisations around the county, and we get on average 2 or 3 recognitions by a King's or Queen's Award each year. That's a tiny, tiny proportion. And as a county, we really wish to try and improve that so that we can get better at saying thank you to all of the volunteers that operate around the county. As a result, I emphasize those words that I said on that previous slide. Please don't be put off, because although it is a process and it is slightly bureaucratic, it's not an overly bureaucratic process. It's nothing like as difficult as a state award. It's a lot simpler. And now we're beginning to get feedback. So unlike a state award where you'll make an application and possibly wait 3 or 4 years and hear nothing, now we know what the process is. We know the timetable of that process. We know when the awards, the successful ones, are announced. And so the ones that have failed, we can actually now go back and say, what was the area of weakness? What can we do to help prevent this happening in the future, or to strengthen the case for the future? So please, I'll leave you just with words to say, can I encourage you to participate, and also to participate by helping promote the King's Award for Voluntary Service around the county. It'll make an enormous difference. And as I said at the outset, the impact it has on the morale of people in our voluntary sector is enormous. Thank you for your attention, and I'll happily take any more questions that you've got.
Thanks, Stuart. We've just got a question. Laura from Age UK has just popped her hand up.
Yep.
Hi there. Sorry, I know you've probably covered this, but I just need to get it clear in my head. So is it, as working for the organisation, I can't set up an account, so it does have to be someone else that sets up the account, and then 2 other people do the supporting letters. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so we will pass the information on to the person who sets up the account, but we don't actually get involved in the whole process of it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, Laura, as I said, the reality is the person making the application is going to inevitably want to come and check some details about delivery. And that's inevitable. And so to say you can't contact the organization, it's all going to be kept secret, I won't say it's a nonsense. It's, of course, it's confidential. The idea being it should be handled like an application for a state award. But the reality is, please don't be put off. Yes, you can talk to the nominator, and I would expect nothing more. And talk to us or talk to me, and we can check as far as we're able eligibility. Once an application's been made, the next phase is those that are considered eligible are passed back to the Lord Lieutenant so that she can appoint 2 deputy lieutenants to independently assess eligibility. So make sure I haven't got it wrong, basically. And that's important. But the last 2 sessions that's happened, I've actually had telephone calls from the assessors whilst they've been with the organisation asking me for my opinion. So it's very easy. So please do contact us and we'll help as much as we can. So yes, the applicant, the nominator needs to be outside of the organisation, but it doesn't stop you from talking to them and helping them in creating the best application that they can make.
That's great. Thank you.
Any more? In that case, thank you very much for your interest. I really do appreciate it, and for your support, and good luck. And I wish you all well for the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much, Stuart. I did see there was I think a hidden question in there. Will all those nominated receive a special letter or some kind of thanks for the nomination, just as people leave?
No, every application is acknowledged. So you get an acknowledgement that it's been received, but that's the nominator. It's not the organisation. Where there have been a couple of organisations that the selection board felt they didn't quite qualify, but the work they were doing was fantastic. I've seen 3 times now they've written back to that organisation and said, although you weren't successful, we were greatly impressed. And the reason for not being successful was regulational, nothing more. And the reason I say involve us is because what we want to try and do is where these applications are successful, that's fantastic. There'll be an award presentation and so forth. But when we know an organisation has done good work, but they've not been successful, there are other routes we can take. There's a lieutenancy commendation from the Lord Lieutenant. There's garden parties, not necessarily royal garden parties, but garden parties around and events around. There's the carol service, the Princess of Wales carol service every year, and we get asked for nominations for that. And these are the sorts of things that we can use as an alternative, if you see what I mean. So no, not every organisation gets thank you letters. But what I try to do is to ensure that every organisation that has applied does know what the outcome is, and that I personally will ensure that they get a proper thanks for the work that they've done, and try and ensure that they get some recognition, albeit perhaps more local than was the case.
That's really good to hear. Thank you. Are there any final questions for Stuart before we wrap up? I know that we've run over a little bit, but there's so much to talk about. Doesn't look like it. So as we said at the start, we will share the slides with you, which have Stuart's personal email as well as the King's Award for Norfolk email, and we'll also share this recording when it's ready. There is a quick survey that would be really handy if you could complete to just tell us what you thought of the session. A colleague is going to post that in the chat, I believe. If you have to leave now, we'll send the link to the survey around as well. We've also got an information page on the Get Involved website about the King's Award for Voluntary Service. So do check that out if you want to refresh your memory on any of the details. And thank you so much, Stewart, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Great pleasure. Thank you.